Probably the largest source of errors among amateur writers, especially on the internet, is the usage of the comma. It seems that the comma is somehow confusing and mysterious and perhaps arbitrary, at least as far as most writers are concerned. It turns out that's not really the case, especially once you get rid of some of the somewhat pointless stylistic recommendations that appear in many sources. Stylistic preferences aside, most uses of the comma follow some fairly straightforward rules. Rather than bore everybody with a list of these rules, I'm going to go through some of the most common errors I see all the time on the internet. First, we have the ever-popular doubled word. Now, there seems to be a perception, at least among amateur writers, that having two identical words in a row somehow shouldn't happen, that there must be some break between them, that it's just not right. The most common case where you get a doubled word is in this particular construction you see now. This method of writing it, however, is wrong. This is the correct form. Now, this is a rather common conjugation of have. The two hads are actually serving different purposes, grammatically that is. But together they form a single verb phrase in the strict sense. That is, had is the verb form. Now, it's important to note that two identical words in a row does not necessarily mean a comma is required, as the example we just saw shows. That doesn't mean that there should never be a comma in such a situation either. The easiest way to identify if a comma is required or not is to replace the two words with different words that serve a similar grammatical purpose. So, for instance, in this case, rather than having a conjugation of have, let's have a conjugation of be. That conjugation for be is had been. And now we don't have two identical words. And it's clear that no comma is required in that case. Therefore, no comma is required in the case of had. There are other cases where the comma would be required, but the same trick can be used. Replace one or both of the duplicated word with a different word that has the same grammatical purpose. Here's another collection of common errors. They're basically the same error. The first one is separating the preposition to from its object Fred with a comma. The second one is doing the same with the verb shot and its object Fred. The third one is doing it with the verb shot and its subject, Joe. Here is the correct versions of all three. Note there's no comma used in any of them. Now, the interesting thing about this particular error is that I see it almost exclusively when personal names are involved. I almost never see it with place names or common nouns. I do see it once in a while, and those are probably simple errors, or a further overextension of this particular error. What I think is happening is the writers are conflating the direct address formation with the usage of a personal name in other contexts. Direct address is basically the sort of thing where I say, "What are you doing, Vern?" In that case, Vern is the name of the person I'm addressing directly. in that case, a comma is used. There's an easy test to see if the comma is correct or not. If you remove the noun and its associated comma completely from the sentence, and you are left with a sentence that is correct in structure and the meaning has not changed, then the comma is probably correct. If, however, removing the noun and the comma changes the meaning or leaves you an incorrect sentence structure, then the comma is incorrect and it should be removed. Now here's another thing that shows up all over the place. This is the dreaded comma splice. It's not strictly wrong in every case, but it almost always is. And whether it's right in those other cases is a stylistic preference. Strictly speaking, in correct writing, at least at this point in time, this is incorrect. One of these two would be correct. Basically, the rule is you don't use a comma to splice two complete sentences together. If for some reason you feel the two sentences don't really quite stand fully on their own and you really feel they should be merged in some manner, the correct punctuation mark is the semicolon, which is the second example on the previous slide. If, however, the two sentences are basically standalone, they don't really need to be run together, the period is the correct punctuation mark. Now here's another set of examples. These all involve the conjunction and. The same rules basically apply for but, or, so, and a few others used as conjunctions. The first one is an example of a compound predicate, which you can identify by the fact there's one subject and multiple verbs. The second one is an example of a compound subject, which you can identify by the multiple subjects attached to one verb. The final one is two sentences linked with a conjunction. You can tell that's the case because you have a subject and a verb in both parts. Here's the correct forms of all three. You'll note that the first two, the commas, have been removed, but on the third one, the comma remains. Basically, a conjunction that links two complete sentences takes a preceding comma. If it's not two complete sentences being linked, different rules apply. In the previous slide, these were examples of two alternatives. In the case of two alternatives, no commas are used, and in fact should not be used. If there are three or more, then commas will appear between each item and usually preceding the conjunction. Now, that's not by any stretch a complete list of errors that people make with commas. Anyway, that's all I've got on the lowly misunderstood comma for now. I'm William Astle. This has been Lost Wizards Musings. Thank you for watching.